Hi, I'm Mike Stoll. Welcome to the MBA Business Bootcamp in Management. What we're going to do is help prepare you to be successful in the management courses that you'll be taking in the MBA program. We're going to give you some basic concepts and information that's going to get you up to speed and make the classes more enjoyable and hopefully make you more successful. Let's get to it. Right now, I'm joined by Dr. Kathy Pelletier, who's a professor of management in the College of Business and Public Administration. Dr. Pelletier is an outstanding teacher. She's twice won our Outstanding Teaching Award in the college. And she's here today to talk about a really exciting topic of toxic leadership. Kathy, what is toxic leadership?
Toxic leadership, it's a very interesting phenomenon because it is a process where leaders who, by dint of their dysfunctional personality traits, they engage in behaviors that are very destructive. And the litmus test of toxic leadership is if the followers are in worse shape after having encountered the leader than when the leader first found them. So it's a very interesting phenomenon, and I'm glad to see that it is gaining steam in the research fields.
Excellent. Not a lot of people have heard of this field. What interested you about it?
Well, there's two reasons primarily. The longer one works, the more likely that person is to encounter a leader who's toxic. And so I think a lot of my research stems from my experiences in the workplace and dealing with various forms of leaders, because then it prompts research questions like what causes leaders to turn destructive? Why do we as followers tolerate these leaders? And what are the conditions in which we can challenge or topple bad leaders? The second reason that I became interested in this field was, well, my area of research is leadership, but if you walk through any bookstore and you go down the rows of the help books and the organizational business aisles, you'll see that most of the leadership books are presented with a positive paradigm, that we're always looking at effective leadership, and we should, it's important, but we read titles such as Going from Good to Great, and The Right Stuff, and 7 Habits of Highly Effective Leaders. Well, those of us who have been subjected to toxic leaders realize, where's the book I can read to tell me how to take a leader who's toxic and get them just to good, right? So that's what prompted my interest in this field.
Interesting. Now, how do we know when a leader is toxic? What do they do or what do they say that makes them toxic leaders?
Well, that's a good question. There's 2 ways of looking at this. The first is, what is the leader doing? Number one, what kind of behaviors are they exhibiting? So when we look at some of the common behaviors of leaders who are destructive, we might see that they're engaging in bullying. They attack their subordinate self-esteem. So you might see public ridicule, demeaning of people, demoralizing, degrading people. Toxic leaders also tend to ostracize people, and the really dysfunctional borderline personalities tend to pit employees against another, castigate employees when they have different opinions. And so, first off is just looking at what are they doing? What kind of harm are they imposing? The second way to tell if leaders are toxic is how are they making me feel? So a lot of my research has focused on what are the effects of these destructive behaviors on followers. And the fascinating and the challenging thing is one person's toxic leader could be another person's hero, right? So how do we, if we can't even get agreement that a leader is toxic, it becomes very difficult to do something about it.
Interesting. You mentioned the role of the follower. What role does the follower play in leaders' toxicity?
Well, this is one of the primary areas in my research. If we take a look at followers and our needs as humans, we have a need, we have pragmatic needs. We don't want to challenge a leader because we might lose our job. We have a need for safety and security. So leaders who promise us that they can keep us safe, or if they can present us with projects where we feel like we could live on symbolically, right? Immortality projects, as they're called, we will aid and abet these toxic leaders, right? Because there's too much to lose. There's too much at stake if we challenge them. On the other hand, there are followers who tend to fall into the leader's entourage. And as a function of being in that in-group, they are expected to be loyal to the leader, buffer the leader from failure, take the bullet for the leader, and they get a lot of rewards from the leader for those kinds of actions. So I think that's another reason why we'll see that some followers will simply tolerate leaders, and we certainly see sometimes politically that the needs of followers, we might even push a leader towards the toxic cliff by putting so much on the leader's shoulders to bear that we don't help them carry the load.
Interesting. So inadvertently, we can sometimes contribute to leader toxicity.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
Absolutely.
Interesting. If I was working in an organization and I had a leader that exhibited many of the characteristics that you've identified as being toxic, what kind of strategies could I use to cope with it or even challenge that leader?
Yes, that's the key question. I think that's the question of the day. There are some strategies, that have been well published and we're still testing them. But here's the first, I think the safest strategy for anyone who is subjected to a leader that's inflicting serious and long-lasting harm is to go around and find out if there are any other powerful, like-minded people who have witnessed the same thing, who would join you in either going to the leader directly, if you feel you have that relationship. The key is never challenge alone. A lot of times we think we're going to come and save the day. But when we do that, depending on the nature of the leader and the destructive actions, you could be targeted yourself. So the safest strategy is find a coalition, go to the leader. If you're not comfortable doing that, every leader, if it's a CEO, you go to the board, right? But every organizational leader, political leader, has someone they report to, someone they're accountable to. You can try that. However, you never know what the relationship is between the toxic leader and the person above that person. So other times we might report the leader to the media. And what I see mostly in my research are people will tolerate it to an extent and then they choose to leave the organization. And as I tell my students, we deserve better. And if you feel that you can't affect change in your organization, get out and leave.
Yeah, because I would imagine that the sort of the long-term effects of dealing with a toxic leader could be pretty dramatic.
Absolutely. I've had people who have told me about they've been hospitalized, ulcers, firsthand. I have worked with very, very young people at the start of their careers who literally have had to leave the workplace due to health reasons, psychologically and physical.
Now, you're one of the leading scholars in this area that's actually looking at toxic leadership, and you've presented papers at conferences, you've had your work published in the top journals in regard to leadership. So you've really delved in deeply into this topic. What are the most compelling findings that you've discovered in your research?
The first, contrary to popular belief, toxic leadership is an equal opportunity offender, such that there are no gender differences in leader toxicity. Men and women are equally likely to exhibit toxic behaviors. Men tend to engage more in bullying. Women tend to be more of the public ridicule kinds of behaviors. However, there are findings that have shocked me. Are stories from employees that have told me how a female threw a swing line stapler at her head. I had a male participant tell me how he was in the military and his doctor prescribed 48 hours bed rest for him, and his commanding officer didn't buy it and made him stand 24 hours out in the cold, so he was gravely ill. And another, the other story, and there's so many of them, which is which motivates me to continue my work in this area, was simply a woman who was not achieving her sales targets, and she went into a meeting and her manager told her she had to sit on the lap of all the men in the room for 5 minutes just so she could be taught a lesson. So these are the most compelling findings, but the most heartening finding that I've seen to date in the research is that the people who are most likely to challenge a toxic leader are the people who tend to be disenfranchised, as we might expect, right? Yeah. So people who are in the leader's out group are very watchful of what the leader's doing because they feel inequitably treated. Right. But in my experimental studies, when they were witnessing a toxic leader, people in the out group were most likely to challenge the leader, even when the leader was targeting a member of his or her entourage. So they're the ones who are going to speak up. And I'd like to think that's because they feel they have nothing left to lose. So that was a surprising finding, because some of us would feel that maybe it's the entourage who are closer to the leader who can say, listen, your behavior was rather destructive today, put it in check, but that is not the case.
Right, interesting.
Yeah.
So where does the field go from here? You're doing more research. What do you think is going to happen in terms of researching this topic? Is there anything new or exciting on the horizon?
Yes, there certainly are. I mean, most of the research in the recent past, and this is a new and emerging field, which is why it's exciting, but we're focusing a lot on leader and follower, and my research is looking at not so much what the leader does, but its effect on followers, and then what are their reactions, and are their reactions based on some psychological drivers. I'm also looking at the conducive environments. What's going on in organizational culture that would allow the leader to do so much damage? And the last piece that where the field is heading now is what to do about it. And so I'm going to be drawing from whistleblower research and ethics research to look at, maybe we ought to look at some of the same interventions that we see in organizations for whistleblowing and apply those for a toxic leader.
So Kathy, that's interesting, because I was thinking in my mind that probably not everybody is born a toxic leader, that there may be situations or culture of an organization may dictate certain styles, and maybe I'm a mid-level manager, and because of my leadership above me is employing this style, I almost have to do the same to sort of get along and be a part of the in-group. Have you found that to be true in your research?
Well, here's the first part that you said was we don't wake up in the morning, most of us, and think about how we'll wreak havoc that day in the organization. And that ties back to a point that Professor Littman-Blumen makes in her book. She's another noted scholar in this area, that leaders can be toxic whether they're intentionally or unintentional, whether it's intentional or unintentional. I mean, seriously, leaders can be intentionally toxic through avarice, greed, Machiavellianism, or they just simply may be incompetent. But you're right, that to the extent that the culture becomes toxic, followers have a choice. And so that's where I have not done research in this area yet, but you give me a great idea is to look at the levels of moral reasoning of the followers and looking at characteristics of integrity and ethics in followers and see if that has any influence on the decisions they make when they're in an organization where the culture is almost forcing them to do things they wouldn't ordinarily.
Interesting. Since
Yes.
our MBA students are viewing this, it would seem that being aware of the fact that they can be toxic and maybe not even know that they're doing it, this would be an important thing for them to understand as they make their way through the MBA program and ultimately the rest of their careers.
Absolutely. And the fact that you're bringing that up reminds me that I have had students, not just at the MBA level, but at the undergraduate level, who are just starting out in leadership positions. And they come to me after class, after I've gone through the laundry list of the dysfunctional personality traits and behaviors, and they're concerned that they're toxic. So I tell them, the fact that you're up here and you're concerned tells me you're probably not, right? And that's where we let them know that a toxic leader is not your garden variety, hard supervisor who tells you to work harder, tells you to work faster, or gives you a poor performance appraisal. So I think it's important at this stage in their educational career that they realize two things: what toxic leader is, what to do about it, and the fact that it exists, that they're going to experience somebody over the course of their life in organizations or in other realms of society, and they have to understand it so they can know how they can respond.
Yeah, so they can be self-aware and also
Yes.
spot it in the people that they manage, that they're managers, that work for them.
Yes.
Don't display that type of behavior.
Right.
And I think the other great thing about having this conversation is that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my sense is that most MBA programs talk about leadership, but very few of them actually delve deep into this idea of toxicity and the both from the leader perspective and the follower perspective. Correct?
Absolutely correct. As a matter of fact, I get emails from students at other universities, wanting to know if I can help them or even serve on their committees simply because the expertise is not at those universities. So this is a plus, that we do have such faculty with diverse research interests that are gaining popularity.
So it's a real value add for our students in the MBA program to be able to take a course in management and be exposed to leadership and be exposed to toxic leadership, because it's going to give them basically an advantage in their careers to be able to have this additional knowledge.
I agree, yes.
Great.
Yes.
Kathy, thanks again for joining us and sharing that great insight on toxic leadership. Now the next step is to go to the voice-guided PowerPoint presentation. This should take about 15 to 20 minutes and will provide you with a real foundation on management concepts as it relates to organizational behavior and organizational theory. These are going to be critical concepts for your success as you move to the MBA Essentials course, in particular the Management 601 course.